So welcome everyone. Good morning. Today we are going to be covering AutoCAD's top 10 issues and how to fix them. All right. So welcome. Notice all attendees are going to be muted throughout the call. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please post them in the Q&A or the chat panel. We will try to answer as many questions as we can following the presentation. And just a little background on me. My name is Ryan Wunderlich. I have 33 years of experience in AutoCAD and multiple other software programs across multiple industry segments. I've taught AutoCAD professionally at a community college as a certified instructor, and I'm currently teaching AutoCAD, Civil 3D, and InfraWorks here out of the Boise office. I've had more than 15 years in CAD management. The last job I had before I came to IMAGINiT, I was in shipbuilding for cruise ships, and I spent 8+ years in that doing new builds and revitalizations. Before that, I did 5 years of support for a civil survey landscape architecture firm, and I was in the process of converting 6 offices and 200+ users from land desktop to Civil 3D. I've worked in mechanical design, electromechanical, printed circuit board and schematic design, architectural, acoustic, as well as doing equipment layouts in industrial spaces. I currently have a bachelor's in business management and a master's in organizational management. But I'm a CAD nerd, so I'll just be upfront with that. So today's agenda, top 10 issues and how to fix them. First thing we're going to talk about is installation issues, troubleshooting failed install, licensing issues. Then we're going to talk about updating graphics drivers, updating AutoCAD to the latest service pack and hotfix, convert P styles. This is a huge one that I run into quite often. Common things to speed up AutoCAD. I actually have a webinar on this, but we're going to cover a lot of these things very quickly. Drawing maintenance as far as how to keep your drawings working well. There's a couple of things that are involved in that. How to restore the classic interface. For those of you that are using 2015 through 2019, you know in the 2015 version they removed the classic AutoCAD interface that most of us are used to, us old timers. So I will talk on how to restore that classic interface back. And then the last thing we're going to talk about, command line disappears, file dialog boxes missing, and some other tips just to restore some of the classic functionality or restore some of the functionality you guys are actually used to. So the most common installation issue, failed installation. The biggest one that we see on a regular basis here in support is somebody used the install now. Just to give you guys kind of an idea, the install now, what it's doing is it's a demand download. So it makes connection to the Autodesk servers. It demand downloads only the components it needs and tries to install them. At any point in time, if your internet connection resets, bobbles, things like that, it's not robust enough to keep trying. It just starts failing. In some cases, you know, it'll fail epically, and then we have a lot of other issues that get created from that, and we'll talk more about those in the next slide. But what we always recommend is to use the download now method or the browser download. So the download now method, when you get into your AutoCAD account, what you see here is you'll see that I'm looking at AutoCAD Windows 32 English version, and you'll see my button by default is set to install now. What we normally recommend for everyone is to go ahead and click on either the download now or the install now button by clicking on the view all and then selecting that. What the download now does is that it actually installs what's called the Autodesk Download Manager, and what that will do is it will actually download the full software package before trying to do the install. And it uses a download manager, which is very robust. It has a lot of fault tolerance. If it misses a connection, it'll pause itself and then restart as soon as that connection is viable again. With the browser download, you're downloading one file or multiple files depending on what you're downloading. And if your browser, you know, bobbles, whatever, it'll fail that download. So we generally recommend is the download method. That's what our primary method is unless you have a problem. So going forward from there, other most common failed installation, error 1603. This error in itself is a generic error code generated by Windows. 1603 doesn't usually give us a lot of information as far as what happened, but generally speaking, what that is related to is insufficient rights. In other words, the user tried to install the software and either does not have full permissions on the system as a local admin, or some other thing has occurred where they don't have rights to make certain changes to certain folders. We also see one called insufficient, that's the insufficient rights. We do see issues with some antivirus or anti-malware programs causing severe slowness on the install, and in some cases actually removing components after they've been installed. We actually saw this with Kaspersky antivirus. I'm not saying one is better than the other or you have fewer problems, but one of the things we did see when we were installing 3ds Max 2018 is that Kaspersky would go back and wipe out files after they were installed. The other thing is your network or IT infrastructure. If you're using a deployment image and it's causing problems, the next thing that we usually like to do is start troubleshooting to see if you've got a problem with your IT infrastructure. And then the last thing that usually is one of the most common is that there's a full temporary folder, or the temporary folder on the user's machine or under the user's profile is quite full. Basically what happens during the install is that the software copies itself to the local temp directory on the local user's profile and runs all of the operations from there. That's standard Windows operating procedure and protocol. And usually what I see is if someone has more than about 400 or 500 files in that temp folder, it can cause issues. All right. The other one that we see often is the product was already showing as installed after you've had a failed installation. Usually we see this when you've done the install now, something failed, caused a fatal error, something like that. So some of the entries have been put into the computer's registry and shows that the product's been installed even though there's nothing installed on the software. What we generally recommend at that point is use System Restore if you have a restore point. And that's enabled. Definitely do a system restore back before you do try to reinstall again. And then once you've restored back to the point before you tried the install, then we go back, recommend the download now process or the browser download, make sure we get all the files, and then try the installer again. If you don't have that go back point or the system restore point, there's actually a Microsoft tool here where you can actually it's a Microsoft tool to fix the entries. You basically fix problems that block programs from being installed or removed. What you're going to be able to do with that little program is that it fires up. It says, what are you trying to do? I'm trying to install or uninstall a program. What it'll do is it'll give you a list. You should be able to find those programs and list, and it will remove those registry keys. It's fairly good. It works most of the time. Sometimes we end up having to go into the registry manually and start deleting keys. That's a very time-consuming process, and if you make a mistake, it can cause further problems. So we generally try not to do that on a regular basis. Right? Troubleshooting failed installs. So if you have a failed install, one of the things we like to do is you go to the %temp folder. This is how you know exactly where to go. You click Start, you go to the Run box, or you hit Windows key R to run. You type in %temp%. You can also put this %temp% in the Windows Explorer box. That will take you directly to the temporary folder, and there will be a large number of log files in there. And usually what I recommend is that you go to the latest or the newest one in there, which is usually the component that failed. You go down to the bottom of that particular item, or you go to the bottom of that particular log file, and that's going to tell you what caused the error or where the error occurred. If the error is generic, like that 1603 that I spoke about, or is not apparent, you can retry using what's called verbose mode. There's a link here, and what it does is that it actually enables what's called verbose mode when you're doing installs. I can't stress enough that you need to be very careful when editing the registry. Always make a backup and make sure to undo the changes once installed. Your typical installer for, let's say, AutoCAD creates somewhere around, if I remember right, creates somewhere around 15 or 20 meg of install files, log files. When you're running verbose mode, that runs somewhere up to about 120 to 130 megabytes of just standard text files, because it's actually tracking every single component. Sometimes verbose mode will actually expose where the issue is and give you a good error code that helps you track it down from there. The other thing to look at is, were you logged in as a local administrator? Did you disable all the antivirus, firewall, malware software? And one of the things that I do, I also usually like to check is, do you guys have roaming profiles, or do you have spaces in your profile names? Spaces in the profile names can cause problems with some installs, not always. And then the other thing is if you guys are using roaming profiles, what happens when the secondary installer kicks off is that it tries to install the software on the local machine under the user's local profile, and it does not have sufficient rights to write to a network drive. in some cases. So you have to basically take the user off a roaming profile, get their software up and running, and then come back. That's a little more complex, and we usually like to help you through that if you run into that. So those are all the basic install troubleshooting issues. Now we're going to talk about the licensing issues. The most common licensing issue we see for standalone licenses is you put in your serial number, you put in your username and password under subscription, and the first thing it does is pop up this box that says contact your administrator for access. What this generally means is that you are not assigned the software, or there is an account issue if you are assigned. So there are two links here, one for the classic interface in the Manage portal, one for the new interface in the Manage portal, that basically talk about how to add a user and how to assign that software to that user, because under subscription it is always a named user. So a user has to have a valid email address in order to be able to be assigned that software and be able to operate and run those standalone licenses. The other thing is you are assigned, the contract manager has come back, and the issue persists. So the first thing I always tell people is once you've been assigned the software, you go to manage.autodesk.com. You log in with your email address and you use your existing password if you have one. If you are newly assigned and have never created an Autodesk account, click on the Forgot Password link to get a new one. Once you are in your account, verify you can see the assigned license before trying to activate. Okay? And if that doesn't work and you still keep getting that box, there's a link here that actually talks about how to reset the licensing engine. In some cases, there's a couple of files that need to be removed. And once you've deleted those files, you should be able to go through the activation process, and it should fire up normally at that point and allow you to register and activate that software. If you are assigned a license and you cannot see the software in your account, this means that you have an account problem, and you either need to contact us or Autodesk to get that account issue resolved. What we have to do is we have to contact Autodesk. We have to let them know who you are as far as the email address, what asset you're assigned, or what serial number you're assigned, and that you can't see it in your account. Autodesk usually will fix those accounts. It's a fairly straightforward process. In most cases, it's usually less than a half hour to get fixed. In some cases, I've had it take up to a day to get that fixed, but you will have to contact us or Autodesk in order to fix that particular issue. That's all standalone licenses. Now we're going to talk about multi-user licenses. The most common error codes that you are going to get with multi-user licenses are you get an error 0. Error 0 usually means that LM Tools is not running. LM Tools is the software that actually manages and hands out licenses on the server. So your LM Tools may not be running. The other thing is your LM Tools may not be updated. We run into this quite often where somebody's been running 2018 just fine. They get a new license file for 2019. They install 2019 and they get error 0 trying to activate. And it's because their license manager has not been updated to the newest version or the latest version. For the 2019 software, the requirement was the 11.14 version, and these are all backwards compatible. So if you guys are still running 2014, you should still be able to run that on the newer version of LM Tools. The other one that I see most often is that you're out of licenses on the server. -4 error, and it will tell you there's no licenses. That usually means that all licenses are in use, and you'll need to try back again later. Or you'll need to talk to your buddy next door and say, hey, I need you to close AutoCAD so that I can get in it because I need to do something. And the last most common error is a -15. Usually that means something is blocking the communication. A -15 means that, hey, I can talk to the server, but I'm not getting a response back. Where we generally see that coming from is there is an exception that needs to be written into the firewall. So for example, if the firewall is turned on and it's not blocking the inbound communications, it may be blocking the outbound communications. So we usually set firewall exceptions for port 2080, which is what ADSK Flex runs off of. And then the actual license transaction between your machine and the server occurs on port 27,000 through 27,009. We want to make sure that we set those for TCP ports, and we want to set that for inbound and outbound traffic to pass that traffic back and forth. Once that's done, usually the -15 goes away. If you're working remotely or if you're on a very slow connection to your office, then you may need something called the FlexLM timeout. By default, the FlexLM engine that actually is your network licensing has a certain period of time where it's waiting for a response. If you are working remotely over a VPN or something like that, sometimes we have to add this variable to give AutoCAD and the licensing engine time to make all of those transactions across those TCP ports. And so those are the typical ones that we run across with the multi-user licenses. The other ones we get too is that we keep getting a pop-up for the license finder box. What that generally means is that one of two things. Either we have, the user doesn't have rights to update certain files. There's some files here in the program data Autodesk CLM LGS folder that they may not have the rights to update or write files to that location. The other thing is that the registry may have incorrect values or multiple wrong values under this specific key, this FlexLM License Manager key. Double check all of those, and then if all of those are okay, then please let us know. But these are the typical ones. And again, because I was talking about the common FlexNet codes, here's a link here for all of the common codes you'll ever run across from the Autodesk software side. Generally speaking, the ones that you'll see most often, again, are 0, -4, and -15. If you see another one that you don't know what it is, this link will help you determine where the problem may be. Updating graphics drivers. This is a huge one. We see people doing this often. You've been running fine on, let's say, AutoCAD 2016. You install the 2019 version, and now your software continuously crashes when you're trying to do something, or simply will not open, and it keeps coming up with error codes that it can't open. A lot of times that's actually related to the driver on your graphics hardware. So if you're running like an AMD card or an NVIDIA card, we generally recommend that you update from the maker's website for that specific card, NVIDIA, AMD, sometimes Intel. If that does not allow you to install, some machines have specific drivers that are done by the manufacturer of that machine. So in some cases you may need to go to Dell or you may need to go to HP to get the latest one from their site as opposed to the one off the website. And also you can go to the Autodesk.com certified graphics hardware link here. You can put in what product you're using, what version you're using, and it'll actually tell you in that list what the certified drivers are for that card. And that's usually the last resort if we can't get it up and running. All right. So let's say you've got your software up and running, you've updated to the latest graphics, and you're still having some issues. So the next thing we need to do is we need to update your AutoCAD or your AutoCAD vertical to the latest service pack and hotfix. If you're running the desktop app, the first thing to do is check using that, see if you have updates in there, start running them. If it errors or is blank or tells you all of your updates are installed and you know that is not true, then we need to uninstall the desktop app by following these instructions, and then we install the latest one from this link right here, www.autodesk.com/desktop app. Install the newest version because the older versions don't necessarily get the communication or they just error out. Once you have the newest version installed, recheck, see if you have updates again. The other method, and this is the method I actually prefer, is you go to your Autodesk account. You log into your manage.autodesk.com if you're assigned licenses. You'll go to where you see your AutoCAD subscription. You'll click on the View Downloads box, and instead of the Downloads box where we had you initially look at the Download Now, Install Now button, there's a tab at the top that says Updates and Add-ons. You click on that, and it will give you all of the updates for that particular product. So if I'm in Civil 3D and I look at my Civil 3D one, I'll see the updates for AutoCAD and Civil 3D and Map because all three of those components are part of Civil 3D. If I'm in AutoCAD, I will see just the AutoCAD updates, and in this case, the recap updates because they are tied to, there are tie-ins to AutoCAD if you're running recap. You download these files. Again, you need to run them as administrator. You need to make sure the software is closed out. Once you've installed them, go back and see if the behavior changes or the behavior has gone away. This is where I usually see the most number of problems, is that once we get your software installed, once we get your graphics hardware updated, the next thing is to make sure your software is fully up to date. If all of those things are updated, then we know where the problem is, either at that point with something on your computer or something in the drawings themselves. The other one, you open up a file. You did not create this file. You get it from an outside consultant or an outside architect. You go to plot it, and you guys use CTB or color-based, and you only see STBs in that list. That means the drawing that you're opening is a style-based, and you simply run convert p-styles command to change it to a color-based or CTB. If you guys use CTB files when plotting, and only CTBs are coming up in that plot dialog box, then the drawing is color-based. You first start by typing in convert STB to create a mapped STB file, then convert p-styles to convert the CTB to an STB by selecting that mapped STB that you created from the convert STB. What I generally do in this case is I create a simple one using the monochrome CTB. I create a dummy STB named monochrome-convert STB, and then I can convert the CTB file. Yes, these also work in AutoCAD LT, yes. And then I create that dummy STB, and then going forward, any CTB-based drawing that I have, I can point back to this monochrome convert STB. Once it's converted using that style, then I can select the STB I actually want to use based on my standards or styles. Common things next to speed up AutoCAD. There's a couple of things here we're going to talk about. Whip thread, input search options, VT enable, selection preview, cursor badge, layout regen control, and some other things that I have found in my experience to help speed up AutoCAD as far as its overall performance. So the first thing, whip thread is a system variable. Once it's set to 3, the default is generally 1 or 0. Because AutoCAD is still single core, single thread for the majority of its operations, what I usually like whip thread for is to set that to 3, so all regen and redraw operations can actually use multiple cores of processors. What that means is that the more data you have in your drawing, the faster those regens and redraws will occur. Under your input search options, it's used in the command line. If you've ever typed in a command, sometimes it'll hesitate and it'll miss a letter or two. What I generally do is I generally recommend to increase this to about 3,000 milliseconds or a 3-second delay. So if I type in that first letter, it'll go 1, 2, 3 before it'll bring up that box. Or you can turn this off entirely. That's that autocomplete. For any of you that are heavy keyboard typists on AutoCAD, you've experienced this, and it's usually that input search options change the delay time. Other things are the VT enable. What this is, as I refer to this, this is the cartoony pan and zoom. I like my VT enable set to 0, which means that when I type in, when I zoom in and out, it doesn't feel like I'm going back and forth like a camera lens. It goes in increments. I like that. That's my particular method, and it does help, especially with lower end graphics cards. The other big one is selection preview. If you've ever been in a large file and you run across a dense hatch pattern and your mouse just stops, selection preview is what happens. And so I typically set mine to 0 so that I get no selection previews unless I click on something. If you set it to 2, it will only highlight those items when a command is active when you roll across them, and the default is 3, which means it will highlight those objects whether or not you have a command active. That's a big thing, especially when you're dealing with large complex drawings. The other thing is cursor badge. If you hate that little thing over by your crosshairs, cursor badge is normally set to 2. I reset it to 1, and most of the badges will go away. Again, when those badges appear, it's a resource. It's utilizing resource. It's using graphics hardware. It's using processing power. So I generally like to turn those off. The layout regen control, when you set that to 0, what that's doing is that it's changing the behavior of AutoCAD. Instead of caching the model tab and all of your layout tabs into memory, it's only caching the tab that you're in into memory. The reason why this is very helpful is if you have a large number of layout tabs and you have multiple viewports, every time you make a change, you'll see a hesitation because it's trying to update the graphics in every single one of those tabs, even though they're not visible. I like this set to 0. I find it to be much faster. Switching tabs takes a little longer, but my overall performance curve gets better. All right, also go into the AutoCAD options under the Display tab. Turn off the paper shadow. I cannot stress this enough. That little gray fuzz around the edge of paper space, around a paper background, is a huge resource hog. And I can actually tell you that the performance curve is much better in layout tabs when you turn that off. The other thing I generally like to turn off is turn off display digital signature information. Again, most drawings that you ever deal with, or 99.9% will never have a digital signature. And all you're doing by turning that off is you're not letting AutoCAD try and go out and find that information. I like that. It's just, again, one more thing to slightly speed up AutoCAD. And it's another one. And then there's another new one that I've come across, and I've been talking to a lot of people about this. So the first thing to do is also go check your power settings. You go into Control Panel, you click on Power Options, and see if you're running a balanced or high performance. What you see here is my machine. I am running high performance, and you'll see that my processor speed is running at 3.25 gigahertz. When I switch over to the balance, you'll see my processor speed drops to 2.4 gigahertz. This is huge because, again, AutoCAD is running single core, single thread, so you want to get the most speed out of that single processor core it can use, and you'd be surprised on the performance difference just based on balanced versus high performance. So again, always set it to high performance. Make sure, and this is simply part of what I check. I'm on Windows 10, so you can actually go in and see this information in your task manager, but you'll actually see a difference in processor speed based on balanced high performance or energy saving. If you go to energy saving or lowest power consumption, you'll actually see your processor speed drop down to about 1 gigahertz, and AutoCAD is brutally slow. Okay. Now we're going to talk about some drawing maintenance. So tips for maintaining good drawings. Periodically, I always recommend running an audit command, and the first time you run an audit, do not tell it to fix any errors. Just run the audit to see if there are any errors apparent. If you've come up with a list of errors, then go ahead and fix them. You have your standard purge command, where it brings up the purge dialog box and allows you to purge items out that are not in use in the drawing. But what I really want to stress here is there's something called minus purge. So you put in the minus sign in purge. That brings up the command line version of purge. This is the only place where you can get to something called registered applications, or reg apps. What's going on in those drawings? If you are not the originator of those drawings, there may be things that other people were using in your drawings. They've added data to the drawing, and if it's not in use, it's still going to be there. And I've seen cases where drawings have 10,000 or more registered applications that are no longer in use. You purge them out, and the drawing performance changes dramatically. Instead of being glitchy and choppy, all of a sudden after you've done that save, after you've purged those registered applications, when you click on things, you get the performance back that you expect. Okay. A DWG file is nothing more than a very complex database, and as you add more entries to that database, there are more things it has to check when you click on things. So getting rid of those registered applications is really important on a regular basis to make sure that you keep those drawings, the file size and the extra data bloat that can sometimes end up in those DWGs down to a minimum. And then for those of you that run the classic interface, okay, hang on just a second. Let me go back. I've got to repeat the power settings. So go to Control Panel, click on Power Options, which should be one of the items in Control Panel, and check and see if you're on a balanced or high performance. Okay. Again, the difference between these two is your processor speed. Your processor speed, again, because AutoCAD is single core, single thread, is the single largest component that affects how your drawings run. So I just want to make sure you understand that. So you want to be running high performance at all times. For those of you that are me, like old school, you want to run the classic interface, open a browser window. I actually have the AutoCAD Classic Workspace stored here. It's public. Anyone can download this file. Once you've downloaded that file, you go to the command line, you enter CUI and hit enter. You'll come up and you'll click on the transfer tab of the CUI Customize User Interface dialog box. You'll navigate to the right-hand pane and click on Open Customization icon right here. Once you've done, Once you click on the open, pardon me, there we go. Once you click on the open, navigate to where you downloaded that AutoCAD Classic Workspace CUIX. And step 1, highlight the file and select open. What you will see in here is a workspace called AutoCAD Classic. You simply click and hold on that. You drag it over underneath the workspaces on the left-hand side. Once you've done that, you hit apply, you hit a close, and once you've done that, you can now go back into your AutoCAD session, and either from the top, if you have the classic if you have the workspace editor here or the workspace down here, you can go in and you will see AutoCAD Classic is now available. Once you click AutoCAD Classic, it will revert back to the AutoCAD Classic behavior with your standard toolbars and your file, edit, view, insert, format menus as opposed to the ribbon. Now, the most common things that occur, like the command line disappears, file dialog box missing, and other tips. So the most common things that occur after you have an error or a crash, okay? You can start getting some odd behaviors. So what I usually do is I go back in and make sure file DIA is set to 1, CMD DIA is set to 1, and ATT DIA are set to 1. That means that's going to restore the behavior where you get the dialog boxes that pop up as opposed to the command line information. For those of you that prefer the classic style hatch dialog box, the command for that is HPDLG mode is set to 1 as opposed to 2. What that means is that will pop up the classic hatch dialog box that you're used to as opposed to the ribbon interface. If you like the classic layer dialog box from me, or I personally like it, the command is classic layer. That brings up the classic layer dialog box that you're used to from the older versions and not the palettes. For those of you that have ever done, the layer palettes, know sometimes that's a little unwieldy. And then lastly, for the classic array box, which brings up the old box for the classic or for the array, it's not dynamic. It will not be dynamic, but you can get back to that behavior and just simply type in array classic. So that's pretty much everything. These are the common issues we see from the support side. These are the things that I run into most often during my day, and these are the things that I have put together for you as far as the top 10. These are the top 10 things that generally we see on a regular basis that we need to correct when you call us for support or you run into and you're not sure what to do to fix them. And with that, thank you very much, and now we can start some Q&A. So